Good morning, everyone. Guess it's time to begin. So let's start with a word of prayer as we get started. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the beautiful sunshine and the warmer weather that we've been experiencing, and just thank you for all the ways that you bless us. Thank you for this time that we can be together to look into your word and to see what you want us to do in our lives, and give us the wisdom and the knowledge that we need to follow your instructions and your commands. And we just thank you for all that you do for us. In your Son's name we pray. Amen. Okay, last week we began looking at different ways that the tongue can be used for evil. We learned that the tongue can be used for good, and it can be used for evil. The mouth of the righteous is a fountain of life, it says in Proverbs 10. But Proverbs 10 also tells us that the mouth of a fool invites ruin. So we began looking at some of the evil ways to use the tongue. We looked at how people can use their tongue to entice others into evil, to lead others into an evil way of life. The tongue can be used for gossip and for quarreling. This week I'd like to look at a few more bad things that we can use our tongues for. The first of those is lying. That's a biggie. Look at Proverbs chapter 12 and verse 22. The Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in men who are truthful. So right off the bat, we find out that the Lord detests lying lips. And lying lips can take different forms. Turn to Proverbs 25. And verse 18. Like a club or a sword or a sharp arrow is the man who gives false testimony against his neighbor. How can false testimony be like a club or a sword or a sharp arrow? Okay, it can wound, it can kill. How can a false testimony kill someone? Okay. Darlene is saying that false testimony can sway a jury, and people can be condemned to death for false testimony. I was looking on the internet for an example of this. Oh, Mary, go ahead. Okay. Sometimes people outright kill themselves because of false things that have been said about them. It hurts them so bad. I read a story about a man named Ricky Jackson, who, when he was 18 years old, he was accused of robbing and killing a man, and went to trial, and a 12-year-old boy testified against him. And Ricky Jackson was 18 at the time, and he spent 40 years in prison. And finally, the boy who had testified against him came forward and said that he was coerced into giving that testimony. He claims the police coerced him into saying that Ricky Jackson was guilty, and they threatened to put the boy's parents in jail if he didn't go along with it. So Ricky Jackson spent 40 years in prison from the time he was 18 to the time he was 58. Just think of what happened in that section of your life. Those are pretty important years, aren't they? And all because of a lie. So he was actually sentenced, given a death sentence, which was later commuted to life in prison. So he could have very well been put to death because of this false testimony. Yes, Larry? Okay. Okay. Larry's saying that sometimes we just don't tell the whole truth. We leave things out. And in that way, we're actually telling a lie. Ben? Okay. Yeah, it is damaging to the one who says it. Well, let's think a little bit about what the motivation for giving false testimony. What was the motivation of this young boy for telling a lie? Fear. He was coerced into this. Can't really blame a 12-year-old who's being threatened that his parents are going to be put in prison. Maybe he should have come forward a little sooner instead of 40 years later. But his motivation was fear. If the story's true about the policeman coercing him, what was their motivation? Okay, it could have been hate, Terry. Okay. Okay. Terry? Okay. All right. Terry's saying that maybe they felt pressure to solve this crime. The public was probably outraged and demanding justice, and if they didn't know who really did it, maybe they just came up with this guy to get them off the hook. Lee, were you going to say something? Leather? Were you going to comment? Okay. Okay, so this is an example of a false conviction. But it's also possible to have a false acquittal. Look at Proverbs 24. And verse 24. Proverbs 24:24. Whoever says to the guilty, "You are innocent," people will curse him and nations will denounce him. Why is it a serious thing when someone pronounces someone innocent who's really guilty? Okay, makes the guilty person go free. What happens to our society if the guilty go free and the innocent are punished? Anybody? Ben? Okay, it's an encouragement for wrongdoing to continue if you're not going to be punished. Terry? Okay. That's right. Our whole society will break down if justice is overturned. Look at 1928. Proverbs 19:28, and this addresses the issue, I think, and is a good summary of what we've been talking about. 1928, the first half says, "A corrupt witness mocks at justice." So when we overturn justice, we're destroying our society. We're mocking what's right. And why would a judge pronounce someone who is guilty to be innocent? What would his motivation be? Brother? Okay. 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 So Leather's saying that sometimes judges make mistakes. They don't do it. They don't do it out of wrong motivations, but there are occasions when they do out of wrong motivations. Larry and then Ida. Okay. Okay. So money or greed or the thirst for power can be a motivation to give the wrong decision. In a lot of third world countries, we hear about, bribing judges. And yes, Dennis? Okay. Okay. Yes, Mary, and then. Oh, okay. Prejudice can be a motivation. That's been a problem in our country, in all countries probably. Art? Oh, Elijah? They covered it? Okay. All right. Well, in all of these cases, lying can be motivated by a selfish motivation. The person who lies is trying to get something for himself or protect himself or get some benefit out of it. Let's look at a different kind of lying. Turn to 26:28. A lying tongue hates those it hurts, and a flattering mouth works ruin. I'd like to talk a little bit about flattery. Let's look at one more verse dealing with flattery, and that's Proverbs 29:5. Whoever flatters his neighbor is spreading a net for his feet. So hold that place, and let's talk a little bit about what is flattery. Dennis brought this up to me last week. What's the difference between flattery and praise? Praise isn't wrong, is it? When it's appropriate? But what's the difference between flattery and praise? It is, yes. Okay. Flattery might be an insincere praise. And what could the ulterior motive be? Okay. Trying to gain something. And how do you gain something through flattering somebody by praising them? Okay, yeah, flattering a king. Kings were known to be surrounded by yes men, weren't they? Because all these people were trying to gain something from the power and the wealth of the king. So flattery, they use flattery to get into his good graces. Ben? Okay, that's an exaggerated praise. It's you may be saying something that's true about the person, but you're just laying it on a little thick. Terry? Okay. So Haman was using words to get into the king's good graces and try to accomplish his purpose of destroying the Jews whom he hated. Dennis? Okay. So flattery is kind of a form of deceit. You're saying something you don't really mean in order to gain a selfish end for yourself. Yes, other? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. It could be. We got to be careful in judging the motives of others, but we need to be aware of the same thing. Larry? Okay. Yeah, we need to be truthful, don't we? Then on the other hand, people don't want to hear about every ache and pain we have either, do they? Did I see a hand over here? Okay. Let's look at a few other verses that are kind of related to flattery in chapter 26. I want to read Proverbs 26, verses 23 through 26. And I think these are all closely related to flattery. Like a coating of glaze over earthenware are fervent lips with an evil heart. A malicious man disguises himself with his lips, but in his heart he harbors deceit. Though his speech is charming, do not believe him, for 7 abominations fill his heart. His malice may be concealed by deception, but his wickedness will be exposed in the assembly. What do each of those 4 verses have in common? What's the common theme in all of those? Something being hidden. I like that illustration of a glaze covering the earthenware. When you break a piece of pottery that's glazed, the outside layer is smooth and shiny, but the inside just looks like a piece of rock or dirt. They're comparing that to a person who is hiding something. On the outside, he's looking good and shiny, but he's hiding this evil in his heart. And that's a type of deceit. I guess that could take more forms than flattery, but I think flattery is closely related to it. This one verse that we read about, whoever flatters his neighbor is spreading a net for his feet. What is that talking about? A trap, a net. That's how they would catch animals and birds and stuff. They'd hide a net, maybe under some leaves and grass, and then stand back, and when the birds landed on it, they'd pull a rope and catch them. So flattery is a type of setting up of a trap for people. Okay, what we've seen so far is that all of these forms of lying are motivated by selfishness. The person wants to get something out of his lie. But there is an example of a person in the Bible who lied, and they're praised. And that's Rahab. Do you remember what the story of Rahab was? Mary? Okay. The men went in to spy out the land, and the authorities got wind of it, and they came looking for them, and Rahab lied to the authorities and saved the lives of these men. Is that wrong to lie in that situation? Okay. Yeah, she's listed in Hebrews chapter 11 as one of these people of faith. And that was what she did. She lied to protect the Israelites. I was thinking of Corrie ten Boom. Are you all familiar with the story of the hiding place? How she lived in Holland, and her family were Christians, her and her sister and her father. And they decided to hide Jewish people in their attic to protect them from capture. And because they were Christians, they really wrestled with this issue of lying to the Nazis, because the Nazis came to their door, and are you hiding Jews? Or they decided that it was okay. I mean, they really had to think about it, but they decided it was better to lie in that situation. Well, what is the difference between lying in that situation and these other types of lying? Other? Okay. Okay. Yeah, that was a lie, and I don't know that God approved of that lie. That he was doing it to protect himself. Ben? Okay. 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 The Tin Boom family was lying to protect people from death. And they were actually putting themselves at risk by doing that. And in fact, they ended up in the concentration camp, and the sister and the father both died in the concentration camp. But Corrie ten Boom lived. But I think in that situation that's not what God detests. That's not the kind of lying that God detests. Larry? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, we don't want to get real loose and just lie whenever it's convenient, that's for sure. But I don't know, it would be a struggle to think about that. Yes? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, we don't want to take that lightly. I know the early Christians didn't lie to protect themselves from death by denouncing Christ or saying, I'm not a believer. They would tell the truth and be killed. Larry? Okay. Okay. That would be tough, though, to be in the tin boom situation where you were sentencing. Yeah. Well, something to think about. Let's move on to the next topic, an evil way of using your tongue, and that's the subject of boasting. Turn to Proverbs 27. And verse 2. Let another praise you, and not your own mouth, someone else, and not your own lips. We're not supposed to be praising ourselves. And is that the definition of boasting? Praising yourself? Bragging? Okay. Why is boasting a bad thing? Okay. Darlene says we're not to think of ourselves more highly than we ought to think. We're supposed to be humble people. Yes, Bill? Okay. When you boast, you have to back up what you say. Okay, maybe it's an exaggeration of the truth. What about Muhammad Ali when he said, I am the greatest? He wasn't exaggerating, was he? Yeah, he was the greatest boxer of that era. Ben? Okay, you're thinking of yourself, and yes. Art? Mm-hmm. And I think he even used that language. He said, I must go on boasting about myself. He was making a point there. I think Paul was a humble man, but he was making a point that he was qualified to be an apostle and that he had the authority. Yes? Okay, boasting is the opposite of humility. And we're supposed to be humble people. We're in the middle of the football playoffs right now. And when you see someone make a touchdown, there are usually two different ways they react when they make a touchdown. What are those different ways? Bad and worse. Okay, Terry? Okay. Yeah. They're calling attention to their own physical attributes, aren't they? Right. And the person who kneels and says a little prayer, what's he saying? Okay. Mm-hmm. For praying. Yeah. But just think a football player who runs for that touchdown, there's just a tiny little difference between him and someone who couldn't do that. Just if you rip one little piece of tissue in his knee, he can't play football anymore. And we need to be humble. Look at 1 Corinthians 4 real quick. Get a New Testament insight into this area. 1 Corinthians 4 and verse 7. For who makes you different from anyone else? What do you have that you did not receive? And if you did receive it, why do you boast as though you did not? What's that saying? What do we receive from God? Everything. If you're intelligent, you got that brain from God. If you're strong, you got that strength from God when He formed your body. If you're fast or any characteristics, if you're a good singer, Ernie? Yeah, we have no reason to boast. We only have a reason to be thankful. Dennis? Okay, that's that first verse we looked at. Let another praise you and not your own mouth. We don't really like to see people boasting. I'd rather see a guy kneeling in the end zone than someone beating his chest and flexing his muscles. Larry? That's right. Right. Remember the story of Herod when he gave the speech in Acts chapter 12? Why don't we read that as the last one we end on? Acts chapter 12 and verse 21. Actually, there was a verse that this went with. Proverbs 27:21 says, "A man is tested by the praise he receives." So a man is tested when he's praised. And I think this Acts chapter 12 is a good example of someone being tested by praise. Look at Acts 12:21. "On the appointed day, Herod, wearing his royal robes, sat on his throne and delivered a public address to the people. They shouted, 'This is the voice of a God, not of a man.' Immediately, because Herod did not give praise to God, an angel of the Lord struck him down, and he was eaten by worms and died." So here's a man who apparently gave a good speech, and the people were telling him he was a god. I think they had ulterior motives. I think they were flattering him. But he didn't give the praise to God. He was just soaking it all in, and that was displeasing to God. So we need to be humble. We need to not boast. Well, we're out of time, so yes, Carlin? Okay. Yeah, we can boast in Christ and give him the glory for whatever we have, for our salvation and for our righteousness. He counts us righteous even though we're not. So we can boast in that, but we don't want to boast in ourselves. Well, thank you for your comments, and we'll start there next week.